Coming up today, US President Barack Obama signs legislation hitting North Korea with more stringent sanctions over its nuclear and missile programs. Pushing the approval of counterterrorism bill, South Korea's presidential office urges lawmakers against neglecting the threats posed by North Korea and international terrorist organizations. First, the OECD calls for urgent action to kickstart slow growth as it slashes its projection for global growth this year. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome. It's 6 a.m. on Friday, February 19th. Here in Seoul, I'm Mark Broom and you're tuned in to our early morning edition of Arirang News. Our top story this morning, South Korea's presidential office is once again urging the National Assembly to promptly pass bills related to counterterrorism. There's increased urgency in the air after Seoul's spy agency warned that North Korea was preparing to strike South Korea. Song Ji-sun starts us off.
North Korea is intensifying preparations to carry out various terror attacks on the south. That's what South Korea's spy agency reported at an emergency security meeting with the parliament on Thursday. The possible attacks, which have likely been ordered by North Korea leader Kim Jong-un, could range from cyber and biochemical terror to even abduction of South Korean government officials. On these possibilities, the presidential office of Cheongwade urged for preparations beforehand, saying that it's no use to mend a barn after the horse is stolen.
It's a pity that the National Assembly has yet to pass the counterterrorism bill, which can effectively tackle terror threats from North Korea or other international terrorist groups.
The call follows President Park's remarks to lawmakers during her parliamentary address a couple of days ago.
북한이 각종 도발로 혼란을 야기하고 남남 갈등을 조장하고 우리의 국론을 분열시키기 위한 선동을 강화할 수도 있습니다. 그럴수록 우리 국민들의 단합과 국회의 단일된 힘이 북한의 의도를 저지할 수 있는 유일한 방법이라고 생각합니다.
With North Korean terror attacks becoming more likely to happen anytime soon, the presidential office called on lawmakers to help establish a systematic and legal ground to guarantee the protection of the people and assets of the South. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
So, with the new type of threats coming from North Korea, there are fears, naturally, about the effect they could have on the South Korean people. For a look at what forms the potential terrorist acts could take and whether Seoul is ready to combat them, Gonsoa reports.
Since North Korea's fourth nuclear test in January, South Korea's National Intelligence Service has been watching for signs of impending terror attacks from Pyongyang, including the possibility of cyber attacks. North Korea has a history of hacking into South Korean systems, targeting a media company, a financial institution, and a nuclear power reactor since a third nuclear test in 2013. But on Thursday, lawmakers listed even more possibilities, such as abductions of anti-North Korea activists, defectors, or government officials, or the delivery of threat letters or parcels to media outlets that criticize Pyongyang.
Public facilities and key structures such as subways, shopping malls, and power stations could also become targets.
Related ministries vowed to prepare for any threats from North Korea in all possible forms. Seoul's Defense Minister Han Min-gu said that the annual military drills between Seoul and Washington that kick off in March will be the largest ever, around double the size of last year's.
Our military has sufficient power to customize our strategy based on the South Korea-US joint defense system to deter and respond to any threats.
Seoul's Foreign Affairs Ministry says the so-called standing structure is in place and ready to protect South Korean nationals abroad in the event of terror attacks.
We have given an order to all of our diplomatic offices to be prepared for terror attacks.
There are concerns that the North's new threats could create uneasiness in South Korea and beyond, as terrorist acts would affect the people in a more direct way than the North's nuclear and missile tests. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now, lawmakers here in South Korea spent much of Thursday quizzing government officials over their decision to suspend operations at the Inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Complex and start talks with the US over the deployment of a high-tech ballistic missile defense system. Shin Se-min with the details.
Inter-Korean relations and national security took the center stage on the first day of a two-day parliamentary interpellation sessions on Thursday. Lawmakers were divided along partisan lines on both issues. On the government's decision to shut down the Inter-Korean Factory Park, the ruling Saenuri Party sided with the government and said the choice was inevitable. The main opposition, Minju Party of Korea, questioned the validity of the decision. The party also followed up on an earlier claim by the unification minister, asking him whether the government has the evidence that the money made by the North Korean workers at the Inter-Korean Factory Park was used by the regime for its nuclear and missile development programs.
You have switched your words multiple times. Are there valid documents to back up such claims?
As I've said before, the government understands that there have been occasions when the money was channeled into two offices of the regime to be used for weapons development.
National security was also in focus during the session, including possible deployment of the U.S. missile defense system known as THAAD on the Korean peninsula. The defense minister responded to allegations that the system does not strategically correspond to the threats from the north.
The system is made to shoot down the North Scud missiles. So with it, the ability of the ROK US forces to counter the threats from the north would be enhanced.
On the issue of national security, Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-won said the government stands firm on the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula in response to recent policy debates on whether Seoul should have its own nuclear arsenal. The second interpellation session, which focuses on the economy, will take place on Friday. It's expected to revolve around the issues of the country's ambitious reform drives that includes the labor sector. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
US President Barack Obama has signed a bill expanding US sanctions against North Korea in the wake of the regime's recent nuclear test and long-range missile launch. The House and Senate last week overwhelmingly passed that bill. The White House says that with President Obama's signature, the law takes effect with immediate effect. It will slap sanctions on any person or entity importing goods, technology or training related to weapons of mass destruction or engaging in human rights abuses in North Korea. Now, the expanded sanctions come as the US and China are in some rather delicate negotiations over a UN Security Council resolution on North Korea. Officials say the UN sanctions are likely to be approved before the end of the month. We'll have further details on the US sanctions on North Korea during our next newscast. South Korea and the United States have begun strategic talks in Washington on ways to deal with North Korea's latest provocations. Jo Tae-yong, who is South Korea's Deputy Chief of the Presidential Office of National Security, has been meeting with U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken and White House Deputy National Security Advisor Avril Haines. They have reportedly agreed that China's cooperation in securing tough UN sanctions is the key to sending a strong message to Pyongyang. Blinken told a local TV station that the US was focused on getting a Security Council resolution with, quote, real teeth, end quote. The US official added that Washington will take its own steps to protect itself and its regional allies if Beijing lets North Korea off the hook. That includes the deployment to South Korea of the THAAD missile defense system. However, Blinken noted that North Korea still does not have the technological capability to successfully launch an intercontinental ballistic missile at the United States. The South Korean government has told Beijing that it's far too early to reopen talks with North Korea. The rebuttal comes in response to remarks by China's foreign minister, who advocated reviving the six-party talks instead of sanctioning Pyongyang for its recent provocations. Kwon Jang-oh with the details.
Seoul's foreign ministry has rejected China's calls to reopen the six-party talks in response to North Korea's recent actions. The ministry spokesperson said that North Korea first needs to stop its provocations and show it is serious about denuclearization. He said, in accordance with the landmark September 19th joint statement, establishing a framework for peace on the peninsula could be discussed by the relevant parties only after the North makes progress towards denuclearization. The joint statement was reached in 2005 at a round of six-party talks where North Korea agreed to abandon its nuclear weapons program in exchange for economic and political aid. But talks stalled in 2008 after the regime carried out its first nuclear weapons test, which it followed with another 3 tests since then. The UN Security Council is currently working on a draft resolution for stronger sanctions on North Korea, but China has already expressed its reservations.
The world's hot-button issues can't be resolved through pressure or sanctions, let alone military means. They will only exacerbate the situation. All parties should consider the resumption of talks while a new UN Security Council resolution is being discussed.
Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea has questioned whether North Korea deserves to have UN member status. Speaking at a forum on respect for UN principles in New York this week, South Korea's ambassador to the United Nations, Oh Jun, said he could not help but ask why North Korea is in the UN since it violates most of its responsibilities, like upholding the UN Charter. It marks the first time South Korea has made such a comment on North Korea since both Koreas became members of the United Nations in 1991. The OECD has cut its 2016 global growth forecast to 3% from 3.3% projection it made late last year. In its interim economic outlook released on Thursday, the OECD warns that global economies have flatlined and an urgent policy response is needed to tackle a series of serious problems. It also urged governments to rely less on central banks to stoke growth. Now, global growth is seen at 3.3% in 2017. Looking at it by country, the United States is forecast to grow 2% this year, the UK 2.1% and the Eurozone 1.4%. In Asia, China is projected to post growth of 6.5%, India almost 7.5% and Japan 0.8%. The Korean government has unveiled some new measures aimed at creating additional growth engines and boosting the labour market, but the efforts come with their own set of challenges. Hwang Ji-ae with the details.
Creating around 500,000 jobs and shaking loose roughly $40 billion worth of investment. These are goals set forward by the government as it announced a new set of measures this week to prop up investment. But it's going to be a bumpy road ahead. Out of around 120 tasks included in the fresh measures, about 1/5 require revisions to related laws. With a number of economy-related bills already being held up at the National Assembly and political parties stuck in gridlock, making these amendments looks more than challenging.
Cooperation from the National Assembly is a must. The government also has to persuade parties with related interests when it comes to fostering new growth engines.
While putting new fields of growth at the forefront by cutting red tape and new service industries like the sharing economy, sports, and healthcare is viewed as a big step forward in revitalizing the economy, experts say more could be done.
From the perspective of people who are actually doing business, they still feel there's a great burden from regulations.
Some experts add the new package could also have incorporated measures to support local manufacturers that have traditionally generated wealth for the economy, especially at a time of slowing global demand. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
Well, those are the stories we have for you on this Friday morning here in Seoul. For more, for the latest, don't forget to check out our website, arirang.com/news. And if we don't see you over the next 24 hours or so, have a wonderful weekend. Until next time, goodbye.